Today is Give Yourself Permission to Move You and Yourself Forward with Dr. Joshua Torres. I've put a little reminder in the chat. If anybody has any comments or any feedback on our programming or wants to help us with future events, email me personally and I will make sure it gets out to everyone else. Any questions during the presentation today, you can put them in the chat. So on or about 9:45, just before closing, we're going to open it up to open questions. So right now, I'm going to introduce you to the other co-chair, Tucker, who's going to introduce you to Dr. Joshua Torres.
Thank you, Dan. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming. It's my privilege to introduce Dr. Josh Torres. Josh is the co-founder and CEO of Torres Coaching Group, a coaching firm located in the New York tri-state area. He holds a BA and MA from the University of Valley Forge and a doctorate in strategic leadership from Regent University. He has several certifications such as PCC, Professional Certified Coach, from the International Coaching Federation, Conflict Management Coach from the Center for Conflict Dynamics, and CPMC Certified People Management Coach from the Workplace Coach Institute. He brings over 15 years of coaching experience to his clients. TCG exists to help people and organizations to become the best versions of themselves. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Josh Torres.
Hello. I always love the letters because it almost sounds like an alphabet soup, right? And the PP, CP, TP, popopo. It's like it's a tongue twister in and of itself. Well, hello. I'm calling from a non-disclosed area. I mean, it's completely dark over here. I don't know why, but we have the brightest lights on. I'm really excited to be with you guys. I love talking through organizational development, talking through conflict management, organizational alignments, those type of things. I love hearing about people's strengths and talents and energy and so on. And so I'm excited for this call. Probably, I think I'm a little bit more nervous because they kind of souped it up. So I don't know if I'm going to be as good as they said. And so hopefully I will be. If not, ooh, sorry about that. But here we go. Let me open up my slide for you. And that way we can move this bad boy along. Okay. Let's see here. All right. So as mentioned, today's topic really is about giving yourself permission, giving yourself and your organization permission to move forward. And one of the things that we've noticed in having a conversation like this, there's something that we want to set up ahead of time. And the first thing I want to say is, TCG has been doing this for a combined 25 years between my partner and I. And so we have 25 years of experience, and we've done this a lot with mom and pop shops to large organizations. And what we've learned over this time is that no one is 100% correct. And so regardless if I've done this for the last 15 years, regardless of my degrees or certifications, so on I don't know everything. And in fact, I'm sure that on this call, I'm going to learn as much from you as you're going to learn from me. I'm excited in calls like this because I get to add another flavor and learn a little bit more and how I can best support those who I come in contact with and connect with down the road. And so what I like to say is that there's a 90 and 10 principle. We like to say the most that we can be is 90% correct, with a 10% window of being wrong. The other flip of that is that the most that we can be is 90% wrong and a 10% correct. And so, I would go, the best haircut in the world is a bald head, right? And you would go, I don't know about that. And I would go, well, depending on who you are, I would say that's 90% correct. And, Dan may say that is a 90% wrong. And we would slide that back and forth. What happens in most conversations like this is the moment you hear something that contradicts some truth that you know, we often shut down. We will turn to something else. We'd go, dude's off the wall. I'm gonna doodle. I'm gonna check emails. I'm gonna check my text messages. I'm gonna do these things, because the moment we hear something that that contradicts our experience, it causes us to disengage. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is, over the next, 5 hours together, that just kidding. Now there are people just signing off automatically, right? And we go, over this next, few minutes that we're going to spend together, when you hear something wrong, or something that contradicts your experience, I'm just going to ask you to slide that from a 90% correct to wherever that measurement is on you. And remember that the most that I can be is 90% wrong, which means there is a 10% truth factor there. And I'm going to ask you, as members of this call, to go, okay, what's the true component to what he's saying? And that's going to help you and I stay connected during this presentation, and give you an opportunity to chat in and go, you know what, my experience says this. And we're going to validate that. Why? Because that's your experience, but it's also going to add another layer of understanding to what we're talking about. Is that fair? Just nod right where you are. There you go. I see that hand. Right. And so we go, great. Okay, now we can go, we've given each other permission to be wrong. We've given each other permission to communicate and to share. And so, we have a chat box. I love interacting with people in sessions like this, because that's what makes it more fun and engaging. And so if it's just me talking, it's not going to be as amazing as when you are involved. I mean, I don't even like hearing myself sing in the shower. So please, please, please put pieces in, because that's going to make it better. So when we talk about giving yourself and your organization permission to move forward, there's some things we have to talk about ahead of time. And the first one is organizational forces, or forces that press into our organization or come out of our organization. And the first version of that is internal force. An internal force is not positive or negative, it is indifferent. And so it is what's happening through this process that makes it positive or negative. And so when we talk a negative internal pressure, it creates an explosion. It creates, just the walls get pushed out. And here's what I mean by that. Oftentimes there's team discourse, devaluing of staff, broken trust, there's a revolt, staff transitions, deficits in creativity, and all of these other things that happen within the organization. And that is an internal force pushing out. Now, we would say that there are several times where there are people within the organization who are by personality trait or by history or so on, the bad apple. Well, here's the thing. There are people who are like that, but most often than not, the pressures that exist within an organization often don't start off with bad apple people. They start off with negative experiences. And so we know that organizations face this all the time, where there's struggle inside the organization. There's people who, there's discourse, there's frustrations, there's broken trust. And in fact, the number one reason for staff transition is never finance. It's almost a devaluing of an individual. It's a conflict that can't be resolved. These are the things that tend to create an explosion from the organization. So far, so good?
Yeah.
Okay. The second type of force is external forces. Things that are happening on the outside of the organization that presses in. And these causes an implosion. And so we deal with what happens on the outside of our community that pushes inward, that presses and challenges what's on the inside of the organization. Perfect example that just recently happened. I don't know if you guys were aware about this, but we just had this major crisis called COVID, and we're kind of still in the process of it. And a lot of us shut down, and then many of us are struggling to get back up on the ground. That's because of external forces that press into the organization and cause an implosion. And in most organizations, the way we deal with the implosion or the pressing of the walls is that we start to cut off the ends to create space. Typically, we go essential people in the middle, and then as we move out, we have people who are non-essential. And as those walls get closer, we start to slice those pieces off. Now, before we get there, we always do the financial component of how do we cut costs and all these other things. But then at some point as business people, we know that, overhead becomes the mother of all cuts, right? And so we start to slice those things down. And we end up realizing that at the end, when we survive, it becomes more difficult to bounce back. Why? Because the supports that were there to keep the walls where they were are no longer there. And so we see in an implosion experience that it really causes us to have a false purpose. And so we start slicing prices, we start doing everything we can to save ourselves, to put things out there, to make things happen. We start to devalue, there's a pressure of devaluing the organization. And so what are they really here for? They really don't connect well with the community at large. And so why? Because every community is trying to do the same thing you're doing. And in their shifts, the connective tissue that exists between your organization and your community become detached. Is that fair? Because everyone is trying to do the same thing you're doing, right? And so we're trying to create this response. And so what happens is we create a reactive product. And so these are products that we go, okay, so if we can't do this, how do we do this? And if we don't do this, how do we do this? Excuse me. And so then we have this rotation of this evolution that moves us from our purpose to a false purpose, which then creates the staff cuts that we're talking about. And then unfortunately, and eventually creates an organizational collapse or a closure of companies. And we've already seen that a lot of small businesses are struggling in the recovery of what has happened through this external force into an internal organization. And so those are the negative sides of external and internal pressures or forces that exist. And I think we've all experienced those, right? We've all gone, oh, dear God, help me. These are horrible experiences. If you're anything like me, at 4 o'clock in the morning, you're like your bright-eyed, bushy-tailed going, ah, right? And you're just like, all right, caffeine, something help me, right? And so, it's this hot or common tea, more of a tea person than a coffee person. And that's the war in our house between coffee and tea, but that's a different story, more counseling to come, right? And so how do these forces help? If they're indifferent, if they're not negative forces only based on what's happening, how do they help us? And the reality is that you really need a healthy balance between internal and external forces. A balance between these two really help us to grow. It adds a growth to our organization and solidifies our relationship with those around us. And so we see that organizations, especially over the last few months, organizations that did a lot of ambassadorships to connect to their community. And we're going to help you. Why? Because our purpose of our organization is to make our community better, regardless of the product that we have. We've noticed that they then became like that connectivity, that connection, and going, you know what? Wow, they care. They care about what happens next. And I'm not talking, there are organizations that have more money and they're able to do more extensive things, but there are things that each organization can do that looks different from each other. And so, knowing your boundary there really is important, just like knowing, what you're able to do from a fiscal standpoint and so on. And so when these two are in a healthy manner and are able to move forward, here's what we see. We see team synergy, we see a valuing of staff, we see development and trust, we see commitment, we see staff retention, we see an increase in creativity. We get to see clarity of our purpose, a value of our organization, cultural impact, proactive products, staff increase, and organizational stability. These are things that come from a positive interaction or positive view on external and internal forces. Unfortunately, we know from a psychological perspective that when something happens to you, you have about 6 seconds to respond to it. And so we have this layer gap between the point of impact and 6 seconds to go, how do I turn this for good? How do I use this for our betterment? But the reality is, for most of us, we take a reactive approach when something comes to us because that's our natural instinct, is to become reactive. A part of these reactive components keep us from pulling into a proactive or active mindset. And doing so, we learn that action is faster than reaction 100 out of 100 times. This is why people in the military, firefighters, they train constantly so that their reactive state is actually a form of a proactive stance. Is that fair? And for the majority of us, depending on, they say that 10,000 hours of any particular field makes us an expert in that particular field. And so this is where, if you're on site and you're doing an assessment of a home, if you're at that 10,000 mark, you can assess almost to the penny, to the dollar, what the cost is going to be. Same thing with any one of us. If you take whatever your profession is and you've spent 10,000 hours within it, that's around the 5-year mark, within 40 to 50 hours a week, pressing into that, you go, the likelihood is that whenever you walk into a situation that is specific and tailored to your community, you're able to assess that fairly quickly because you've trained to be a proactive mindset in a reactive state. But when something like COVID comes along or something like that happens, no one's trained for it in most of our areas. And so that then becomes this thing that puts us off kilter, which then makes us remember there's a 6-second window. How do I respond to this? And so I like to say that internal and external forces ask you to do two things. It asks you to ask yourself, am I using my team effectively? And the second one is, are we effectively communicating our purpose? And so how are we really connecting to our community? How are we really using our staff? And with these two questions in mind, there are 3 areas of help that we turn to. And so here are our 3 focal points as we're going to process this out today, which is why those handouts are going to be super important for you. Right? And so we go, here's what we're going to focus on today. And I'd love for everyone to just take some time and process the questions as we go through them. And that is, the 3 areas is our organizational purpose, our leadership strengths, and our team value and alignment. And so these are the 3 things that if we are able to tweak and focus on, the likelihood is that we're going to get a little bit more bang for our buck. This is not anything that anyone has to go out and create. This is everything that you got. I like to say this is the part that if you go into your kitchen, whatever you got in there, that's what we're going to cook with. Right? And so we go, what's the point of food? Right? For substance, right? To keep us going. And so you may have 3 ketchup packets and ramen noodle. Well, we're going to make you the best meal that we got with the 3 packets of ramen noodle, right? Or it's like what people say, you have water and you have flour. If you mix those 2 together, you're going to have some good bread that's going to sustain you. But if you drink all the water and all you got left to eat is the flour, you're going to have a problem. And so the goal is, how do we take what we have to make that flour? So far, so good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I want to talk to you about something that's come out of our doctoral work, or my doctoral work, that we use with our clients. We've used this from a point of an individual to an organization, Fortune 100, to a very large organization. And so to quite frankly, we've used this with some country influencers that go, okay, so when we look at your particular country and the region that you're in, how do we really focus these components? And so there are 4 things that we ask people to consider, and that is the soul, the heart, the mind, and the body. The soul is the purpose of the organization and the purpose of the person. What's the purpose of your organization? Not your product. And so we often get these 2 confused, the purpose and product. We go, well, our purpose is to sell this thing. And I go, whatever the thing is, that is almost like the silver platter that you serve your purpose on. Why is that important? Because if all your purpose is your particular product, then people are going to look for the cheapest version of that product. And so we often go, well, if I can just lower the dollar amount on this particular product, then you're in a bidding war with Walmart. You're in a bidding war with Costco. You're in a bidding war with Lowe's and Home Depot and those type of things. And at that point, you're going to lose. Why? Because they know how to drive their prices down, as far down as possible. And so the goal is not your product, but your purpose. So what is the purpose of your organization? What is it that you're bringing to the table to your community that's really going to impact that in a mighty way? In fact, we know across the U.S. prior to our COVID-19 experience that the mom and pop shops were actually increasing. The hardware stores were increasing. Because at some point, all of these other hardware stores kind of collapsed, and then you have these big superstores, and then people had to drive far distances for it, yet they didn't have the person they can go back to just right down the street. In fact, in our community, we have a hardware store. It's called The Hardware Store. That is the name of the store. And the interesting thing is that everyone goes there. It is their first stop before driving 20 minutes to the Lowe's, which I found that interesting. And they have, a well-versed staff who knows their things, but they're connected to their community in such a way that they charge more for pieces. But what they give you, what their ability is to give you accessibility to things in your area. How fast can you go back and meet Mr. John, who's been there since 1904, right? How do you meet they give you that connectiveness to their community, purpose, but how fast you can get to them versus others. So their purpose is served on top of the products that they provide. The next component is the heart, which is the core values or the guiding principles. Now, the heart is not connected to the individual or to the organization. It is connected to the purpose. And so if my purpose was to be a bodybuilder, right? And everyone on the call's purpose was to be a bodybuilder, there are things that bodybuilders have to do, regardless of who's on this call. Those are your guiding principles. So when you look at your purpose, and on your sheet, feel free to write these things out. And so when you look at your purpose, your organizational purpose, your personal purpose, depending on why you're on this particular call, what are the guiding principles? What has to get done for these things to work and to be sustainable? Oftentimes, we go from our soul to our mind, or our soul or our purpose to our strengths, and we bypass the guiding principles. And so we go, well, here's the soul, here's what I do, and I'm just going to do it. Well, that's not how that works. It's almost like the people who go, I'm going to be a bodybuilder, and one of the things that I have is endurance. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pump, and I'm going to make that work. And you go, the reality is that's not going to work for you. You're actually going to harm yourself long term. You may see some success, but it's false success because it's not sustainable. And so the heart really matters to each organization. What does it look like? What do you have to do to communicate your organization's purpose or your personal purpose? So far, so good?
Yeah.
Okay, just want to make sure that we're all on the same page so far. Now that we've outlined what our purpose is, and we're looking at the heart, and we're going, okay, here are the guiding principles. What does it take to do this? Now, I want to be very clear on this. Sometimes we are not able to assess what we need to do alone. In other words, we're going to need other people who have walked down this particular path, mentors, consultants, those type of things, that's going to tell you this is what you have to do. And so it's important to get people to help you to figure that out. And what I've learned is that some of these consultants or some of these mentors will do it for a cup of coffee. If you call them up and say, hey, listen, I know you do this, and I'd love to ask you a few questions. And I'd like to take you out for a cup of coffee. Or I'd like to meet you at the chambers for a cup of coffee, right? Because you get to have free coffee there whenever it's open, right? You go,
We do.
Come on down, get a cup of coffee, we're gonna sit here and talk it through. Well, have that conversation. Conversations are cheap, but highly effective. And so you may have 3 out of the 5, but if you don't have all 5, the likelihood of you being as effective as you can be is going to be an issue. And so do yourself a favor, find someone who does what you do and who has been doing it successfully and going, hey, I just have a question for you. Many of us have mentors. Many of the organizations that we are connected to will have people who have done this, and that call is free. Some you have to pay for, and that's often the nature of the beast. For the higher up the ladder you go, there's often a cost to that. But the mind of it is what is specific to you. How will you allow your strengths to impact the purpose of your organization? And this is often where I have a lot of point of contention or a little bit of more of a strife, because it's really important for every organization to know that the king of the organization, the queen of the organization, the person who is in charge of the organization is the purpose, not the CEO, not the C-suite personnel. The purpose is what is that tipping point of the organization. Everyone else in the C-suite category lends their strength to successfully complete the purpose or to communicate the purpose of the organization. And so it's really important that we then go, okay, so if purpose is king or if purpose is queen, then what is my strength in relationship to the guiding principles so that we can successfully create the purpose in our community? And so some people are very good communicators. Some people are very good one-on-one. Some people are really good with numbers. Some people are really good with mechanics. Some people are really good with, you list whatever it is you're really good at. And what I often say that these are the things that come easy to you. List the things that come easy to you. The things that make it that you go, oh, I can do that all day long, right? This is where Steve Harvey once talked about a lady who makes pie, right? She loves making pies. It's easier for her to make pie, but she's created, because she figured out what her strengths was, she was able to create like a multi-million-dollar organization off of making pies, right? I like to tell people, when I was a kid, no one was paying $3 for a bottle of water. No one was paying $3 for a bottle. I don't care who you were. It was a hose. It was the faucet. In fact, I remember one time the grocery store was selling a gallon of water for 24 cents, right? You go, no one in their right mind, club soda was free, right? And you go, no one was paying for that. And now there's a $1 billion industry on selling water. In fact, the water we have is often cleaner than, that's a completely different story, but you go, you have a $1 billion industry on something that 30, 40 years ago, no one in their right mind would have paid money for it. Now there's something called a water sommelier. Can you believe that? You know how there's a wine experts? They now have water experts that will talk you all the way through all the flavors and so on and yada, yada, yada. So, and I digress. But all that to say is find your strengths. These are not your skills. Skills are things you learn. And oftentimes we are hired based on our skill, or we create a business based on our skill. And then over time, that strains us because they're not actually built on our strengths. And so then we go, I don't know why, but I hate my job. I do my job very well, but I hate it. It's because you're working on your strengths versus your you're working on your skills versus your strengths, right? And so let's move to the body. The body gets divided into two components. One is the team that you have and the people that you serve. The team that you have and the people that you serve. And it's really important for a lot of leaders and organizational leaders to understand that your team is not often the people you pay. Sometimes those are your staff. And so I was brought into one organization where the head person would come in, they would sit with their team, we would do this whole coaching session with the team at the organization. We'd get 3 hours into it and yada, yada, yada. And then the next day we'd come back and he'd change everything.
Oh my God.
I'm just like, okay, maybe we missed something. Day 2, this happened. We got to day 3, I was like, okay, time out. What is going on here? And he would go home, he would have a conversation with his spouse, and he would have a conversation with a friend of his, as he normally would do to kind of relax his day. And they would chime in on things that then he'd come back and go, this doesn't make any sense, we got to do this stuff. Well, it's important to know as a leader of whatever organization you are, that your team may not just be the people in the office. And sometimes the disconnect between why an organization is unable to move forward is because not all the team players are in the room. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so it really is important to look at who is in your sphere of influence. Who are the people who really influence you to be the best version of yourself or the best to move your organization forward? And you will recognize that some of them are not paid by your organization. The other component is that there are people in your organization that because of the way they were hired, you're not really using them to the best of their ability. Just because you hired me to serve coffee and answer the phones doesn't mean I'm not able to really impact your community for the betterment. I have strengths and skills and so on. And so leaders really need to take a step back and go, who's all within the organization and what are all of the strengths that exist? We learned a long time ago, you're not able to do more in a community that expects you to do less. And so if you box someone in, it doesn't matter how great they are. It doesn't matter what they're able to do. They can pursue 15 different degrees. They could get phone calls from all over the country to come and do stuff. If you box them into here, then the likelihood is that you're not going to be able to use them effectively. And that's often why most people transition out, because you pigeonhole them maybe on their skills. And they're like, man, I'd love to do some things within my strength that would then create synergy within your organization. And the last component is the community you serve. Now, here's the kicker. The soul or the purpose of your organization can only be reviewed or assessed based on the connection between the purpose and the community you serve. Why is that? Well, because I know why we exist, and I may train my staff very well to know why we exist and the guiding principles or so on, but the proof is in the pudding, and the pudding is tasted by those who we serve. It's not tasted by me, although I can be in the kitchen and go, that's great. It's tasted by those who sit at the table, our clientele, the people we're connecting with. And this is why a lot of organizations really should do assessments or exit interviews with their community. And so when you serve people, have an exit interview. So let's talk about what you're walking away with. Tell me how we've impacted your community. Explain to me how we could have done this better. I often tell people to do that also in the middle of your project. So tell me how you're doing. If I purchased a policy from you, right, and you're on the other side of it, well, guess what? I'm getting emails from other people. And so part of this is going, hey, you bought a policy from us, just want to check in. How are you doing? How's your policy going? What has changed in your life that we can really make better? And so these are things that we use to come across the way. And so these are the four quadrants that we walk through that should be on your sheets right there. And then there's a last page. And on the last page, ask you really 3 questions. First one is, what area needs my attention? And so we would, let's say if all 4 areas need your attention, then start at the first one. Clarify your purpose and let that one lead you all the way around. The second one is, what do I need to do next? Maybe you need to set some time aside so that you can actually walk through that. Maybe you need to realign yourself with who actually is your team versus your staff. And remember, it's not always people who are paid. It's many people who you give permission to speak into your life. And so you go, who are those persons that I get to sit down with? I have a best friend who lives in 2 states over, and he and I call each other all the time, and we are on each other's team. But he is not on my staff, nor am I on his. And so I'm very aware of that. And so I talk with him first as I process, he helps me to process, and I take the rest into my team that I work with within the organization. The next component is, when am I going to do it? This is the rubber meeting the road. And oftentimes we have what's called a BHAG, right? Big, hairy, audacious goal. I'm going to do all of this tomorrow. Rome wasn't built in a day. You didn't gain 40 pounds yesterday. You're not going to lose it tomorrow, right? It takes time to increase, time to decrease, time to reassess. And oftentimes I love to ask this question. When you write everything out of when you're going to do it, then ask the following question. What would impede you from doing it? External forces, right? Pressing in. Your internal forces says write it all down. External forces says you can't do that. So if you're having relatives come and visit you, trust me, you're not going to get it done. And we go, but this is a business thing. It is a business thing, but the likelihood is that you're thinking about all other things that are happening at home that has to get done that then will impede you from moving forward. So this is all she wrote so far. What I do have is questions, discussions, perspectives, insights.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Josh. Okay, I'm just trying to get out of, oh, can you, do you mind if you stop sharing your screen?
Absolutely. Let me just find my stop sharing button.
Thank you, Dr. Josh. And I would like to say that that was almost like an entire education in a 20-minute period. I mean, that was really good. And, are you okay with us opening up to some direct questions to you, Josh?
Absolutely.
Go ahead,
Anybody?
Dan, you want to start or you want me to?
You go ahead, Nina, you start.
Okay, so thank you for sharing this process with us. It does seem a little daunting, and it all starts with purpose, if I heard correctly. Can you give us, how do you start defining your purpose? I think a lot of people would even find that hard to even, addressing and moving forward with. What could you you give us a couple of tips on how to get started?
Yeah, and so that's a great question, because what happens is we go, okay, so I got to look inside to determine what my purpose was, right? Okay, so wait, we started this business, we had this product, we wanted to sell the product, and if we're all honest, we have 2 bad habits. We like to eat and sleep indoors, right? And so part of that comes a cost to things. And so we go, okay, so how do I sell this product? And so what I often do is, let's do some research. Let's sit down with some of our previous clients and go, what did you get out of working with me? What did you get out of our product? What was it that stood out to you? Or I'd go sit down with our staff and go, what do you think we produce for people? What's our purpose in this organization? Talk to the people who are on your team, not just the people who are paid. So when you hear what we do, what comes to mind? And start listening to the stories. Don't defend anything. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that we have. We go, man, that's not what I wanted you to get out of that. It's okay. You know, we can fix that down the road because that's perception, not truth, right? And we go, perception can always be changed. Don't be offended by it. Just take the information in. And we go, when we take a look at that, we go, you know what? That's not really what I was hoping to communicate. What I was really hoping to communicate was this. And so knowing what's not you often helps to create that space for you to discover what is you. Is that fair?
Mm-hmm. That's great. It's always good to talk to your customers.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a fountain, as a marketing person, there's a fountain of information just to talk to your customers that you can use in so many ways. So thank you. That's very helpful. The other thing you talked about is community. And I think we're all feeling a little separated from our community. I just wanted to, in many ways, in different communities within our, what we deal with every day. Does that give us an idea of what that community involves, or what that includes? Because my thought is, and Alex, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we're seeing, even if you consider the Meadowlands as part of your community, which many of us do, we're feeling a little distant from that community, from the people that we know in the Meadowlands. Would that be part of the community of our business?
Yes and no. And so this is why, there is your R&D, right? And so a part of the Meadowlands is your R&D community. We talk, we interact with one another. So we're learning from each other. We have these conversations about businesses because we're expecting that there's going to be a strand in what they say that's going to help us go, Eureka, that's what I've been waiting for. And so there's this creative component in the Meadowlands, and that you really do get from connecting with other business persons. The other component that exists there is you may find in this haystack the needle of who your personnel is, who your idea client is. And so when we talk community, we're not just talking globally, or we're talking more regionally, and we're going, who is it that I actually serve? Who is my best client? And how do I communicate who my best client is? So take nationally known organizations, take NBC or CW or any of those type of things that show TV shows, right? I used to live right outside Philadelphia. And so in the bulletin boards in the Abington and the Willow Grove and those areas, it said CW or NBC or whatever, the CBS, and it had the picture of the cast, right? But if I drove the same street down that led me into Philadelphia, same company on the billboard, completely different cast. Because the cast, they wanted it to look like the people who live in that particular community. And so they were really looking at what is our market in this particular community. And so if my market is, bald men with glasses, right? that has goatees, and I go, there you go, right there, bro. I see you. I see that hand, right? You go, that's my market. And so wherever I go, while I may be in an R&D community where we're going to talk and I'm going to learn from you, you're going to learn from me, whenever I see someone who meets that strand, I'm going in for the kill. And so a part of this is really identifying who and what is your market. Mm-hmm. And we go, everyone's my market. I go, that's not true. Okay. Everyone is not your market. And if these large organizations are able to tailor and do the research on what their market looks like in these particular areas, every one of us really needs to do that component as well. In doing so, in conversations with our clients, we find not what are our competitors, but people who are in the same genre as us, which means those people can become a part of my R&D community. And I think that then becomes why we butt heads a lot, because we go, well, that person is looking for a bald with glasses too, and so I can't work with them. Take Apple, for instance. If you were to sit down with Apple executives and say, hey, let me tell you what Microsoft is doing, they're going to go, that's awesome. Why? Because Microsoft has a different community, and it doesn't affect what they do. This is why we all got upset when all Apple did to their phones was move the head jack from the top to the bottom. Everybody flipped out like, this is the dumbest thing on the face of the planet. But there were lines of people outside the store. We're just like, what's wrong with these people? They moved the jack from the top to the bottom. And other people are like, yeah, we did that months ago. And so their clientele is unique, and they don't allow competitors, if you will, deter them from pursuing what they know needs to get done. And so I think that becomes a part of how we define our community, how we define our R&D community, and how do we find our market and how we label our market properly.
And I have one
A
other
quick question,
oh,
Josh.
And Earl raised his hand. Just one.
Oh, okay. Sorry about
No,
that.
no,
Go
no.
ahead,
You
Earl.
can go. I was gonna say Earl raised his hand. So
Mine is really short and sweet. Like if you look at the Meadowlands Chamber in particular, and all these small businesses that are in it, a lot of us are in the same businesses, but some of us, as a personal business, our strength is better in one category as opposed to someone who's better in another. So in my world, it would be an insurance agency. Is it sometimes beneficial to have my community actually be one of my competitors to show respect in public to their strength in order to keep up the healthy competition and therefore receiving it back the other way?
Yeah, and so I think it's a Miracle on 34th Street where Santa's like, oh, we don't have it. Go to the other store. They have it at a better price. And then people are like, you know what? We're coming back here. And so no one is, go back to the 90-10 principle. No one's 100%. You're not going to be 100% in every category. It's foolish to believe that, because if you were, then the likelihood is that all these other companies would die off, right? And so part of it is going, how do we connect people with what is best for the client? And so there are things that I do with my coaching that other people don't do. And there are things that other people do that I just won't do. And I'll go, you know what? I know a coach who actually handles that. I love to connect you with that. My honesty with my vulnerability and what I do and don't do makes you more loyal to me.
Yeah.
And we've all seen this in all these other areas. Yet when it comes to business, we go, we have to be all things to all people. And we go, that's just not realistic. And so, you can, what is it? Was it master of none? I forget the first part of it. When it comes to trades.
Yeah, it's, I know what you're talking about though.
Yeah, so you can do a lot of things, but you're just bad at all of them, or you're not great at any of them.
Oh, jack of all trades, master of none.
Trades, master of none. There you go. And you go, so that becomes a component of it. And here's the thing, when you are master of none, that is a greater issue than the other component. And so we like to say bad is worse than good is good. How do we know this? Because the majority of us can pick a negative situation almost instantly. If I were to say, tell me a bad story of business, you go, oh, I got one of those. And they go, tell me a great story of business. You're going to go, give me a second. Because bad is connected to our emotional response. And it burns in. And that's how we naturally are. How do we know this? Burn yourself on a fire, right? You touch the stove once. You'll never do it again. You won't do it again. In fact, you won't even get near a stove. You will order out for the rest of your life, depending on how bad you burn yourself on the stove. And that becomes a part of the story. Same thing with bad business experiences. And so bad is worse than good is good. So if you have a bad experience in one, but a good experience in the other, they will hesitate in coming back to you because of that. And this is just the nature of human beings. It's just how we are. And we see it best manifested in animals, right? And if an animal is in an abusive situation, it takes them a while to recover from that, even if they're in a good one. Why? Because their previous experience keeps them from moving forward in it. It's just like, take insurance, right? Now, insurance, depending on the insurance that you work with, it is specific to its franchise or that particular branch office, right? And so technically you can have the two under the same umbrella, Jack's Insurance, right? Two businesses. If I have a bad experience in Jack Insurance over here, I'm not going to come to this one. I'm going to go to Billy Bob's Insurance. Why? Because I've classified all of them under the same umbrella. And that's how we lose our business. And so a big component of that is going, how do you stand out? How do we help to communicate what we ourselves in this particular office is great at? And we're going to build on that. We're going to deal with what's called fatal flaws, right? And we all have what's called a fatal flaw. Fatal flaw is what will inevitably get you from being successful. And so I don't care who you are or what part of the planet you're from. I don't care if you come from Mars, you're going to have a fatal flaw. And you have to identify what that fatal flaw is, because you will butt up against that down the road. And that's different from strengths, skills, and all those other things.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you. And Earl, you have a question to ask? Earl Peter?
If you are
Alice, do
there,
you think you
speak
can
to us.
there you go.
Wait, I think we finally got him.
So I have a not a unique product. I sell video production work. And everyone says, oh, I need a video. But I'm not really closing them, because when push comes to shove, people then just say, well, I don't know, I don't want to do it right now, or I don't have the money. So I'm in this spiral where I keep lowering my prices, but then all of a sudden I'm so cheap, no one wants to trust me. So what I'm getting from you, if I'm correct, is I shouldn't be selling videos. I should be selling the person's ability to reach out to their community.
Exactly. And so depending on, there are several people who make videos, right? And so you go, if you make videos for occasions, you're not selling videos. You're selling the capture of memories in a way that you can always return to. Imagine, if you will, you're at your, I don't know, let's pick a wedding, right? You're at your wedding and you have all of these great memories. But I've been to a wedding and I've had one. And you know what? Let me tell you something. I don't remember half of it. But imagine had I gotten a video 10 years down the road. Now I have kids and I want my kids to see and interact with what happened then. Can you imagine what it looks like to sit your kids down when they go, mommy, daddy, or, parents, tell me what it looked like when you got married. And we sat down and we turned on the video. And there's Aunt so-and-so and Uncle so-and-so who are no longer here, or so-and-so who, when I was a little boy, they did this for me and they did that for me. When I go through my wedding album, there's a lot more dead people than alive, right? And so I go, my kids don't know their names and don't know their stories and don't know their personalities other than what I tell them. But if they get for a moment, can see them in their element, imagine how that story lives on. And so now we're not talking about, I'm making a video for you. I'm making a touch point, making an emotional touch point, a historical touch point, a legacy touch point that's going to help you to move down the road. When you talk about videos and you talk about for businesses, you're talking about how do we help you to best communicate your story? Everyone understands words, but we don't always get words. And so how does this picture really help you to effectively communicate to the people who you want to come to you? And so there's ways that you can spin that in its purest light so that people can really get it. When we talk about being transparent, we often aren't being transparent. We're listing, here's the things that we do, but that doesn't give you transparency. That gives you a menu. And those two are light years apart. Is that fair?
It is. Thank you.
Yeah, the other thing that I want to mention is pricing, and I think this becomes a big issue. There's two things that I always tell people to do. Look at your market and what other people are charging, right? And the other thing is to be very cautious with the bottom of that. We all are people who look at things and from a psychological, subconscious area goes, what's wrong with it? If I offer you a brand new Mercedes at $5,000, you're going to go, wait, what's wrong with the car? Tell me what's wrong with it. What am I not getting in that everybody else is getting? We naturally say that. Versus this car is X amount of dollars, and you go, okay, so what are we getting with that that's different from all these other places? And that's the side of the conversation you want to be on. What are the extra things that I'm getting? Because right now you've already set a standard. And so how are we going to meet that standard? And what am I going to walk away with going, that was the best dollar. From the bottom dollar, I gave the best money on
But
this.
I have a situation where people have expectations of what a video costs, where the industry is, I am within that range in like my main product. But
Yeah.
my expectations are, oh, I should be spending $2,000 or $3,000, when in reality, most people sell a video for a website for $600 to $750.
Yeah, and so there's a component of that where you go, you have to be realistic in your market, right? And so you have to go, where's the competitive number? And then what do we give that's different from that? Plumbers have the same issue, right? These are people who call up and then you go to the plumber, hey, I have this problem, tell me how much it is. And the plumber's like, I have to actually go and see it because that's not actually all the price is. Well, a friend of mine said that it's going to cost X amount of dollars. Well, have your friend do it. And so there's some components where you can't compromise really when you go, it's an understanding component versus a realistic component of what it is. And there are a lot of people who do this, and it's in every market. I'm an executive coach. I go in, they go, well, a friend of mine's a coach. I go, I'm sure they are, but they coach something different than I coach. And so, oh, well, so-and-so said that they can pay this amount. Well, that's fair. But the likelihood is that that's not what it's going to look like.
So, Josh, I'm going to just cut in for a sec. We are approaching the end soon. And I think if everybody has a chance, we got one more hand raised from Tam Vaughn. If you want to ask your question, I think we have time for one more. And then we will be bringing things to a close soon, unless everybody's got some time to stay. Tam?
Hi, thanks. I'll be quick. Hi, Josh, by the way.
Hello.
I wanted to, you used the example, you said something really interesting. Action is faster than reaction. And first of all, the political climate, the election coming up, COVID, a lot of people are definitely reacting, I think.
Absolutely.
But now, and the analogy used was the military, and I guess the military reacts by shooting people, but I'm not really sure. But can you use an analogy? Can you elaborate a little bit more on that and how we would relate that to business? I know, and I really liked, and I appreciate that Earl was so vulnerable and honest about it, because I think a lot of us, that's really the thing that most of us are, I'm having trouble closing things. I mean, I sell training. Right now, that's a problem too. We're not getting the big clients in. But so I definitely get it. Like, you sell an emotion more than your product, what it's going to do for you. But getting back to the action reaction side.
Yeah, and so action's faster than reaction. So what the military does is they train, execute. And, in most areas we have what's called a postmortem. What did we do right? What didn't we do right? How could we have done this better? Where are the spots that needs adjustments? And with every sale that we have, or every potential sale that we have, and we took the time to go back and go, let's bypass I didn't get the deal. And let's go, how could we have done this better? What is it that we could have done? Whenever I sit down with a particular client, I always ask the question, so when they say yes, we go, so tell me why you went with us. Tell me what it is that we said that you said, these are the people for you. And the more we get that information, the more we can then take it into the next conversation. And so when we talk about action and reaction, we go, I need to prepare myself. I need to be trained enough with as much information that I have so that I can then go back into the next conversation and make it different. The perfect example is, imagine a handyman, right? And you have this bag of tools. Well, I'm called to the job. I get to the job and I realize that there's a tool that I need that I didn't have before. Well, I'm now going to go and get and purchase this particular tool so that I can do this job. I am not going to use one of my previous tools and go, I'm just going to reinvent this particular tool and use it. because the likelihood is that I'm going to break something. Same thing in our conversations. I'm not just going to reinvent something from a different story. I want to go and say, you know what? This is a brand new thing. And that is being active in the conversation. And so as I'm here, I'm realizing, you know what? I want to ask this person why they chose us. I want to ask this person what could, and a lot of people won't do, well, that's not true. There are people who will definitely do this. They go, when you don't get the call or when you don't get the job, just out of curiosity, what was it about our competitors that made them more attractive to you? And so that is so that we can be active on the next call. And so part of this is going, instead of going, oh, I didn't get it, I want to grab that. I want to have the presence of mind to grab that information. Just like in the military, when they train, make mistakes and use it. And so one of the things I tell our kids is, you're not allowed to be perfect today. What you're allowed to do is make mistakes. Why? Because that's a part of learning. And in every corporation, in every business, we have to follow the same practice. And so when we go, that's not going to work for me. As a buyer, that's not going to work for me. Well, what was it about it that didn't work? I have a friend of mine from North Carolina who also sells trainings, but he was in-person trainings. And so he would go all over and do this. And so there was a huge decline. They're like, okay, so how do we reinvent ourselves? How do we go online? And the people that he did very well with in person went with someone else online. And so then he had to do the question, so what was it about them? Well, they are very good online, and he's somewhat good online. So he had to learn a whole new skill set to keep people engaged over an online training seminar. And so he had to be honest with himself and go, now I need to grab this information so that I can then prepare myself to be better on my next one. I hope that answered the question.
It does, it does. So I was sort of thinking of the action of being immediate, but the action is also, a lot of it sounds like it's in the follow-up.
Absolutely.
You know what? I had a quick question to tag on to that. So how would you go about encouraging feedback? Because let's say, for example, we lose a member. So obviously, you know, we don't want to lose any members, obviously, and we'll follow up with them. Maybe we'll give them a call, we'll send them an email, you know, trying to find out, like, where's the disconnect? What didn't work for you? And maybe we don't get a response. Is there any way to kind of encourage that? Maybe it's just our approach, or obviously that can apply to anybody on the call. Like, how do we encourage feedback and input from those that have decided to decline our services or our products?
Yeah, and so part of it is creating a culture of understanding your educational side versus your teaching side. And so when someone comes in as a potential client or member, a part of it is going, hey, you know, part of this, here's a couple of things that we do throughout the year. You know, we send you a survey, you know, we give you a call, we send you an email just to see what are some of the things that you're interacting with, or some of the things that, you know, you thought you were going to interact with that you actually didn't. And so, you know, we're just going to check in from time to time. Why? Because we're all about becoming better as we move along. And that also gives people an opportunity to give you permission to make mistakes. Remember what I said, why are people, whenever I get a job, I always go, so tell me why you went with us. And so from the very moment of the signed contract, I want to ask the question. I want to start as a student. Why did you say yes with us? Why? Because that's often the reason why they say no to you. You misrepresented yourself during the interview process. And so we go, I hired you for this purpose, but over time you went down. The other thing that I like to do is to say, hey, you know, I love your company. I'm saying yes to you. And I'm not saying yes just because of financial components. Here's why I want to work with you. And I want to list that. Why? Because at some point you're going to go, you misrepresented yourself. And now I'm between a rock and a hard place, especially coming in to do work with your organization. And so that starts the conversation from an educational perspective. I want to learn from you, you're going to learn from me, and we're going to do that process. That way, towards the end of it, when you go, so I see your transition, we're so going to miss you. I'd love to hear how we could have served you better. Well, the whole entire time that we've connected with you, we've been on this path of trading information. And that helps people to go, yeah, you know what, I'm okay with that. Where most people go, well, you misrepresented yourself in the beginning, I'm out of here.
Right. So it sounds like you're basically saying encourage that right from the beginning. As soon as you start the relationship with that potential client, if you're Oh, okay, I like that. That makes sense.
So if I join the chamber to go, oh, I'm going to join on Tuesday, and on Wednesday I'm going to have 1,000 new clients, right? And you go, first of all, I don't know anybody who does that, but second of all, you go, dude, you done lost your mind, right? You go, there's a component of this that you go, as unrealistic as that may be, there was something in the conversation that made that a possibility of a conclusion. And so that's why I want to clear up what I say and how I say it. There's something that I said, there's something that I did, there was a story that I told that made you believe that if you take this and you add this, you're going to get this. As off the wall as that may be, there's still a 10% truth there that I gave you that I want to make sure I correct the next time I talk to someone.
Right.
And if I catch that up front, then I can go, okay. So actually, let me just rephrase, because I don't want you thinking tomorrow every chamber member is now going to be your client. Here's really what we are. And it helps you to clarify that and crystallize the truth of your purpose, then their interpretation of it.
That's great. Thank you.
Dr. Josh, this has been outstanding. And your answers are as good as your presentation. And, I'm hoping maybe one day we can have you back because I think this was a really good program. We are at 10:10, so it's time to draw things to a close. We're a little bit over. Do you have any last on the way out? Jessica, did you raise your hand or you're waving goodbye? Okay. Anything on the way out? Otherwise, we're all going to be signing off now. Thank you, Dr. Josh. And if anybody wants to get in touch and help us out with the Small Business Council or give any feedback, I put my email up there. Dr. Josh, I think your information's been put out for everybody. If you want to contact him, I certainly will be. And we will see you all the next time.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good morning, everybody.